Hello, everybody. I'm Giorgia Faraoni, a third-year postgraduate researcher at the University of Leeds in the School of Education. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the effects that the pandemic had on my research project, both the negative and the positive effects. Now, just a brief overview of the presentation. I'm going to start by giving you a short background about my project and then how the situation how things were going before the pandemic. And then I'll move on to how things changed after the lockdown in Italy was announced. In particular, I will focus on the methodological challenges that I faced and on the two specific cases of my participants. So, my project is a qualitative longitudinal case study in which I looked at the personal experiences of two UK language undergraduates who went on their year abroad to Italy starting at the end of September 2019. My focus was especially on the affective challenges that they faced during their months in Italy and the coping strategies that they adopted to overcome these challenges. Of course, COVID-19 happened and it added an extra layer and an extra challenge to their experience and to my project. But just to give you an idea, my two participants are two female language students who went to Italy to teach English for the British Council in local secondary schools. Their pseudonyms, chosen by them, were June and Lucia, and June basically went to live on her own in Liguria, in the northwest of Italy, while Lucia found an Italian host family and went to live with them in Le Marche on the east coast of Italy. My data collection lasted around 14 months and it included an online questionnaire, interviews and messages. The online questionnaire was before the start of their year abroad to gather prior experiences and information about their expectations and beliefs about the host country and the Italians and the Italian culture. And it was followed by the first of the three interviews, and then the second happened during the Christmas break, and the third at the end of the year abroad. And these three interviews were to gather deeper insights and also to expand on what was already mentioned either in the questionnaire or in the previous interviews or in the messages. So the so-called buddy system basically meant that I was their Italian buddy. So a native speaker with insider knowledge that could help them if they ever had questions, doubts or curiosities about traditions, habits or anything they didn't understand about the host country. Sort of helper with insider knowledge. And they could text me at any point while I could text them for regular catch-up just to keep my data more consistent and more frequent. I could text them every 4 to 6 weeks. Now, before the pandemic, and I know it's hard to remember how life was before the pandemic, but for my project and my participants, life before the pandemic was going really well. Between September 2019 and February 2020, I had gathered around 4 months of data. And despite some struggles, my two participants were starting to settle in. June a bit more than Lucia, and they were trying to find kind of their identity in the new reality in the host country because they were trying to cope with the challenges of the language barrier, the teaching that was a new experience, the social context, the social life for them, and trying to practice their Italian. So they were trying to find their ways around their new life there. And through our exchanges, also our researcher-participant relationship grew and it became quite friendly. Not over-friendly, but definitely not detached. So we were quite in touch quite frequently. So much so that I was starting to plan a visit towards May or June before the end of their year abroad, just to see where they live, their environment, and gather some first-hand contextual data. Just to give you an idea, at the end of February 2020, June and Lucia, after struggling with similar challenges, were in two different places. So, not just geographically. So June finally started to feel more settled and was ready to live the best part of her year abroad now that she felt more herself. Lucia, on the other hand, was still trying to find her role and her place in the host family, so she wasn't quite settled. Now, at the beginning of March 2020, a national lockdown was announced in Italy, and that started a sort of ripple effect for my project, starting with methodological challenges. In particular, of course, my contextual data collection could not take place. I couldn't go and visit them. And I had to compensate with other strategies. So I adapted my interview questions and the conversations in the body messages. And I also asked them to send me some representative pictures of their environment. And although I have to say the pictures didn't give me as much contextual data as I was hoping for, they still gave me some insights that I had not planned or had not even thought of. So in that case, it turned out to be quite a good strategy, actually. For the same lockdown and the same pandemic reason, the participants' year abroad also took a different turn. For June, the lockdown meant a shorter year abroad. So when lockdown started or was announced, she flew back home to the UK. And because she didn't want to be on her own, living alone during a pandemic in a foreign country. Lucia, on the other hand, was living with the host family, and she decided to stay for the lockdown. At that point, when it was first announced, the lockdown was supposed to last only a couple of weeks, so it didn't seem to be a big deal. But of course, we know how things went, actually. And June ended up being locked out of Italy, while Lucia was locked in Italy. That meant that the year abroad turned in two completely different directions. And also for my project, that meant a very different schedule to what I had planned for my exchanges. So I had to adjust all my body message frequency, etc. And the interviews had to be postponed. And especially with June, because she was not in Italy anymore, she was not technically in a year abroad, and we had a few months without contacts, almost 4 months without hearing from her. Whilst Lucia asked for more frequent exchanges, and we had almost weekly calls at some point. So in June's case, as I said, she went back home in the UK so that her year abroad, instead of being 9 months long, was only 6 months long, which meant a shorter year abroad for her and fewer exchanges for my project. However, luckily, looking at the bright side, she didn't withdraw. So we also had our third final interview in August that completed my data collection for her. And I have a quote here that I think is very representative of what the pandemic meant for June. And it was in a message that I had asked previously how things were going before lockdown. And June replied, "Oh, things were going really well before COVID, actually. I was at the happiest that I'd been the whole time, and I really felt like I was starting to properly enjoy myself. I was envisioning the March-May period as being the best, the most beneficial part yet. But alas, we know now that that was not to be the case." And it's quite a sad turn of event for June, But she eventually rationalized and decided that, well, and thought that her way, the way she lived, the few months that she experienced in Italy, uh, was still a good way, and she enjoyed those months, also with the struggles. So she rationalized enough. And she was happy of her decision to go back home because, again, months and months of lockdown on her own would have been a nightmare, not an ideal year abroad experience. For Lucia's case, instead, she decided to stay with the host family, and she actually ended up staying until mid-December 2020, so her year abroad actually lasted almost 15 months, which meant her Italian improved incredibly, and so did her confidence. And she managed to, especially during lockdown, she managed to find her own identity and her role with the family, usually the Saturday night pizza chef. Um, and she finally found herself and her voice through the months that she spent basically 24 hours surrounded by the family, speaking Italian in an Italian context. And of course, not to mention that she got to spend the summer holidays in Italy, which is not relevant for my project, but yeah, just to make you jealous as well. Now, this incredible experience and this prolonged year abroad provided, apart from a great experience for Lucia, provided also unique insight on her year abroad journey for my project, and also unique insight and the insider perspective about the pandemic in Italy from her point of view, from a UK student point of view, of how lockdown was in the host country for her year abroad. And in that case, the pandemic turned out to be an extremely positive element for her year abroad. So much so that when I mentioned in the third and final interview with her, I mentioned, oh, what would have happened if you had gone home before lockdown? I couldn't even finish the question, and she interrupted me and said, I wouldn't have known anything. I think it was almost during lockdown. At some point it changed. She was referring to the way she felt more confident, more fluent, more herself. She found her identity. So we can see that lockdown in this case had a positive uh, effect. And my conclusion is that the pandemic had, of course, undeniable negative effects. But if we look carefully, we can find some positive, possibly unexpected um, effect and consequences that the pandemic kind of created. Therefore, my hope is that everybody, and especially researchers, will try and keep an eye open for these silver linings along the way, so that we can turn challenges into opportunities. And for example, the year abroad, my research area, the year abroad post-pandemic and post-Brexit, because yes, Brexit happened in the midst of all this. The year abroad post-pandemic and post-Brexit will be very likely a very different reality from what we studied, and that could be seen either as a scary unknown or as an exciting new horizon for research. And I think it's up to us to make sure that, yeah, we can see it as both things, but we focus on the opportunity side rather than just the challenge and the block and the obstacle. And just as a final point, as a reminder, I hope if you haven't found your silver lining yet, I hope you'll find yours. It's always there, just look. And thank you very much for watching. I'm very happy to answer any of your questions, either at the conference or you can email me. And if you ever need to see cute pictures of my dog or my failed or successful baking experiments, you can also follow me on Instagram. Thank you very much and have a great day.